Does this mean everything I've believed in for so long has all been a myth?
Oh my God.
It'll be a voice that shakes the very foundation of the pit itself, and it'll hear a voice that stops the fall. It'll hear a voice that shakes hell. It'll hear a voice that hell responds to. It hears the voice of the Maker, the Master, the Creator, the Lord of the universe, and hell itself begins to rise. Higher it comes, up to the surface, all for a fleeting moment. The soul has been burning for 1,000 years, may have one moment of thought of respite. Possibly I can be forgiven. Maybe God has changed his mind. Oh, maybe an opportunity. I'll repent. Oh, Jesus, I'd repent. I'll repent, Jesus. But it's too late.
Oh, shit.
We are Mythvision.
Guys, I'm your host, Derek Lambert. Right now, currently, our co-host, Luther G. Williams, Dr. Luther G. Williams, he's in the underworld right now. He's compiling his notes pertaining to his book. Guys, I don't want to give you too much, but he's going to be delving into a variety of theories in this one book. You know, Luther's into this numerology. He's into the esoterics. He's into Roman provenance. He's into mythicism. He's into historicism. He's a histomythicist. He's a hardcore all over the place kind of guy. And so be sure to get ready to get his book when we release that. We will give you guys all the details as time goes on. And let's get right into this show. You guys know we're on Facebook. You know to like us and subscribe us on YouTube. And you know to open up your purses and throw us some shekels if you want to see some great hosts on this show. So that being said, I'm not going to waste your time. I'm going to get right into this. We have Dr. Robert.m.Price with us, and we have Joseph Atwill, both authors of, Joe Atwill has Caesar's Messiah, and he has the Shakespeare's Messiah, correct? If I'm not mistaken.
Shakespeare's Secret Messiah.
Shakespeare's Secret Messiah. Now, Caesar's Messiah is my favorite, but nonetheless, if you want to delve into some literary devices here and understand what kind of literature we're reading, check out both of his books. And then Robert.m.Price, he's got more books than there are pages in the Bible. And go ahead and tell us some of your top ones, Dr. Price.
Well, I have one that just came out called Jesus Christ Superstition, which is not unfriendly to Christianity, though it is severe in its attempts to point out absurdities in superstition to try to get rid of them and see if you have a Christianity left, which I think you would have. So it's not just a polemic. I have... I guess my, which one? Demythologizing. Wait a minute, that's not it. I'm thinking of a different one. Deconstructing Jesus, I'm thinking of. And its brother, you might say, The Incredible Shrinking Son of Man. Both of them deal with the criticism of a historical Jesus, though in different ways. And they're both from Prometheus books. I've had a few from American Atheists, like a couple of essay collections. One is Jesus is Dead, and the other Atheism and Faiththeism. And let's see, there's also my pre-Nicene New Testament, which has the usual 27 books and another 27 by Mandeans, Gnostics, and various others that represent elements of early Christianity that are not represented in the official version, and it's my translation. Let's see, I've also had in the Journal of Higher Criticism, which I edit up. Look at this little, here's the Holy Spirit appearing. What was I talking about? Well, there's the Holy Fable series. That's not the mark of the beast, is it? On his forehead.
I hope not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Holy Fable series, people seem to like that. The subtitle, the Bible Undistorted by Faith, and the first volume is the Old Testament, where I take it pretty much book by book, sometimes related groups of books, and try to show what critical scholarship makes of author, date, reliability, and all that stuff. I have some interesting theories I've never read elsewhere, like what it was that Ezekiel's vision is describing. I've heard all kinds of things, but I've come up with something I think nobody else has. It's much more reasonable. And then the New Testament, I've got the second volume is the Gospels and the Book of Acts. The third volume is the Epistles and the Apocalypse. The fourth volume, which is in the works now from Pitchstone Press, is about modern gospels of various types. And then I'm hoping to be working with Ibn Warwick on volume 5 about the new approaches to the Quran and Islamic origins. So that's going to be fun. I think maybe my most popular book might be my takeoff on the the Purpose-Driven Life by Rick Warren. I did a chapter by chapter rejoinder to that called The Reason-Driven Life, and I try to show how this guy is just really a bubblehead, and that he's a poor representative of Christianity, and that he's wrong. And I found that which, despite what I just said, is not simply a put down, but also tries to say, okay, there is something to a spiritual life. It's just not necessarily what these people say. It's not in the straitjacket they put it in, and I've gotten perhaps more response to that than any other book, though it's minimally critical. Then I've got other ones in the works, other ones that are out. Can't even quite think of them all, but I've got at least 2 more big ones in the pipeline. One, a mythicist book to be called Christ, Mythicism, and Gospel Christology, which is about the big issue of if the Gospels seem to get higher and higher Christologically, with Jesus the man in the Gospel of Mark and Jesus the God in the Gospel of John, why does mythicism say it happened in just the opposite order, that Jesus was a God who was humanized? And I said, well, there's an answer to that, and I go into that. And other things, and this collection of essays by me and many others on called The Varieties of Jesus Mythicism that John Loftus and I are working on now. So
and Joe's going to be in that. Joe's going to be in that.
Is.
So
I'm writing, oddly enough, a chapter on the Roman provenance theory.
I can't wait. So let me connect you two for a second here, because this is important. I love bringing you guys together. We had nothing but a positive feedback on the last show that we had. That was an outstanding program that we did, and a lot of people wanted to see it again. So of course we had a anonymous guest who donated and said, hey, I want to see this thing again. And isn't there a Journal of Higher Criticism that Joe has, or that's going to be released, or something to that?
Yeah, we're in the 14th volume of the Journal of Higher Criticism. Started in the 90s, and after a hiatus of some years, it's back. And he did an article that is really fascinating. Readers of Caesar's Messiah will find it somewhat familiar, but it's economically put together, and a powerful comparison of gospel incidents with incidents from Josephus, etc. Much like comparisons between the Gospels and the Old Testament, which I explored in the Christ myth theory and its problems, or parallel accounts of Moses and Jacob in Genesis, once you see, or Peter and Paul in the book of Acts, once you see the extent and nature of these parallels, you begin to realize this is literary in nature, not historical. And he does that with material that nobody else really has even tried. The Journal of Higher Criticism, I believe at one point there may have been an online version of it, though I wasn't in charge of that. Now I know it is. It's published through CreateSpace on Amazon, and that's really the only place you can get it. I just look up the Journal of Higher Criticism, and it will show the covers of the issues we've put out through them. And Joe's article is in one of them. I don't have it in front of me now, but whether there is an online version of it, I'm ashamed to say I don't know. I do know it's out on Kindle and in print, but since I have to buy them myself, I don't get copies as I would from a regular publisher. So the way to look into that is Amazon and the Journal of Higher Criticism. But yeah, he's wouldn't want to have it without him. In fact, I'm kind of hoping Joe may do an article or a review on the kind of similar approach, and I do mean to qualify that, with I'm losing my wits these days. The woman in Scandinavia wrote the Jesus Mysteries. I know there's another book with that title that's mythicist also.
Right. What is her name? Yeah, and there's a number, quite a few books out that have sort of the typologic conception. One person is comparing like the activity in the Gospels to events 20 years out.
Yeah, that's her, I think. That's the approach. Right.
And I actually had an exchange with her, and yeah, fascinating material. I think that the most natural one to look to connecting into the gospel time period would be 40 years out, because he is the human Passover lamb, and he actually specifically predicts events that are 40 years out. I mean, you've got the raising the temple and the encircling of Jerusalem. And so that provides, I think, the more natural context. But I think trying to read the Gospels in that fashion, read them typologically, read them as they are relating to, the literature and the history of that time, that's the right thing to do. It's exactly the opposite of trying to read them as, as someone who is believing them as divine material. The way that they have presented to us, historically as the Word of God is, man, that is just the very last perspective you want to take. I mean, we were talking before, we started this show, and I was suggesting that it really is time for the mythicist position, the position of trying to find a more natural way of reading the Gospels, understanding this phenomenon of Christianity. It's time for us to really step into culture. I know that Bob and John Loftus are creating this compendium of writers who have different positions about the myth of Jesus Christ. And I think that's going to be a really good step to basically make a broader, approach to the introduction of the ideas into culture. And I've actually been trying to convince Robert to think about a documentary. I think that would be another thing, that videos are, obviously in this era very useful. And so, but it's time. I mean, the historical only perspective is, I just think it's weak, and it's supported by faith really more than scholarship. And so it's time for the scholars that have open minds to come forward and just start getting at culture. I really want the culture to benefit from the skepticism and the idea that Jesus is a historical character, because then you start looking at the world in a general sense of, well, is it propaganda? This is always a good question for the citizens to ask, right? Or is it basically mythology or bad data? Another great question for citizens to ask about information. We're being bombarded, all the different information streams that come into our mind these days. It's good to have a little balance, a little skepticism. And that's why I hope that the Journal of Higher Criticism, becomes online and really, really popular, because it'd be a good place to start people, down a process where they can become more skeptical.
Totally.
Yeah, and I think one possible. By the way, the woman's name is Lena Einhorn. I know her personally. I can't believe I blanked on her name, but I do that with people in front of me who I've known for years. Oh, this is my old pal.
Yeah.
So this
unforgettable. Yeah.
This is my wife.
Yeah. But it's Lena Einhorn, and she's a documentarian. Actually, she's done documentations for TV and on various subjects. She might be the perfect one to do it.
She'd be a good one to ask about this. Yeah, absolutely.
Also, I think it would be a lot of fun to have possibly an annual conference of mythicists, kind of like the Jesus Seminar, which generated great popularity and controversy, which are kind of the same thing. They still have the Jesus Seminar. I've not been to it in some years, but I've often thought that it would be a good thing to have a forum where you could have different mythicist positions presented and debated by those who hold different versions of it and by non-mythicists completely, paper responses and so on. I think that would invite somebody like N.T. Wright or Bart Ehrman or whatever, and have real exchanges with people where you don't know that the whole group is on one side or the other, but this could be done and would be really a lot of fun. Maybe somebody like Mythicist Milwaukee could host it or something.
Yeah. Well,
yeah, it's a great idea. That's the kind of thing that needs to be done. And in fact, all of the problems of transportation can be resolved through Skype. I mean, you can do this now online, virtually. When Bart Ehrman made public comments that I would be so easy to defeat in debate that even his students could do it. And so I said, hey, Bart, I sent him an email. I said, well, Bart, let's have a debate. Why not? But he then said, well, sure, and passed me over to his assistant, who said, yes, so we need to first work out his appearance fee, his airplane accommodations, the hotel. I mean, in other words, it was like $20,000, and I was thinking, gee, that's not really, something I really, think is useful. But we could do this, particularly if we had a website that was basically, the public could focus on, where people could come in and out. In other words, you could, and you don't need to fly people around. You can just have open source areas where scholars can come, and it can either be verbal or in writing, and you can have exchanges. Mm-hmm. I think if it was opened up to the public, where the public could participate in a little bit, this could just be something that'd be very, very popular. Mm-hmm. And so that's I think that's something that we should all try to look into and see what we can do to bring about. In fact, actually, in a way, this show, what we're doing right now, is kind of like a step in that direction. Yeah. It's just, we want to just organize it on a broad scale, and also make sure that that the media can access it.
Well, Joe, you said something important, and I think the elephant in the room for so long was here's the version of mythicism that many are espousing, and I've heard this said, by, I'll leave unnamed, mythicist. This is the version of mythicism that is correct and accurate, and everyone else is bunk. You can't bring up other forms of mythicism. Their opinion outweighed even the discussion of such things do not support it. And I've seen the evolution of Dr. Price, who's come so far and saying, I'm so skeptical at this point that I'm willing to allow any and all versions to be discussed and let the evidence kind of do its magic. So something I wanted to bring up, because I know that you once, a long time ago, Dr. Price, wrote a review of Caesar's Messiah.
Oh,
Now, it's like anything. It's like, you go to the gas station, and I love beef jerky. They've got this dry beef jerky. You start chewing it, and it softens up over time, and then it gives you flavor. At first, Caesar's Messiah will definitely be dry and hard, and then when you chew on it and really see what he's trying to say, has it brought some flavor into your life pertaining to what he's doing with the connections of the New Testament to Josephus? And how do you view it now versus the way you reviewed it before?
Well, there's certain things I still don't happen to buy, like the way Joe treats the resurrection or the empty tomb narratives and undertakes a grand harmonization. It's fascinating, but unpersuasive to me, but that's really not the point of the book. And I'm glad he put it in there. I like stimulating ideas no matter where I wind up coming out on them. But the notion of the parallels, since I have since gone into the incredible degree to which gospel and Acts materials appears to be simply, well, not simply, but rewritten from Old Testament material, I can hardly look the other way when you can point out items from Josephus. So I now see that as more reasonable. But also the idea of the Romans having an interest in fabricating some version of the Jesus story. And I think the thing that really clicked, especially with me, was the way this would throw new light on Brandon's hypothesis of Jesus and the Zealots. He said that after a failed attempt at a rebellion by a sword-wielding Jesus and his faction, of which there certainly are signs in the New Testament, like the assault on the temple. I mean, Mark writes it up as if some nut broke into the church basement and overturned the card tables where they were selling old Reader's Digest condensed books. Given what the court of the Gentiles was and how huge it was, which Mark seems not to know, if the story as it reads cannot be accurate, so somebody who knew even less than Mark made it up, or it's a shrunken version of a story where Jesus led a rebellion at the temple and its treasury. And so, okay, there's that. And why would it be rewritten? Well, somebody, and Brandon thought it was the early Christians themselves, whitewashed the original revolutionary and political story because it was moot now. The Romans had defeated the Jewish rebellion, and no sect that was associated with that kind of thing could hope to survive unless it radically changed. So they did. And they retooled the thing so Jesus was a safe preacher of love and somebody that kind of liked the Romans and so on. Well, that made sense that Christians would do that to cover their tracks and be accepted. But it seemed to me to make at least as much sense to suggest that Romans wanted to conspire with friendly Christians. I mean, in the same way they were conspiring with the Pharisees and Sadducees to avoid the destruction of the temple. Of course, it didn't work finally, but that the Romans would, I mean, talk about who would be interested in having Jesus be pro-Roman. I mean, would Christians, well, I guess they could have gone that far, but it made so much sense. And then the linchpin of it for me was this prediction in the Olivet Discourse, Mark 13 and it parallels, that the disciples ask, when is the temple going to be destroyed? And Jesus winds up, here's the signs and all that, but it's going to happen before the contemporary generation dies out. Well, if that is supposed to refer to a literal personal coming of Jesus on the clouds, which you do find in Acts chapter 1, for instance, but if that's what that's supposed to refer to, how could the gospel writer have apparently approved that by putting it in his gospel for all to see, and yet known that it didn't happen? I mean, unless you think the Gospel of Mark was written before 70, which there's no way. How could this survive if that's what it was supposed to mean? Because if so, you just get in a bullhorn and say, hey, Jesus made this failed prediction. Did you hear? It's like Harold Camping, what a prophet. He predicted the end of the world. That, of course, didn't happen. But what a prophet. Would you do that? And so it occurred to me, maybe there is something to the God's agent of judgment coming before 40 years have passed and destroyed the temple, period. And I suddenly saw it in a different light. In fact, I just wrote an article for the Journal of Unification Studies called The Synoptic Apocalypse and the Son of Man, where I try to show how Mark 13 doesn't actually ever say Jesus himself is coming back. There's no second coming of Jesus in that. We read it into it. And so by reconsidering what Joe and some others in the same vein have said, and by learning more about the possibilities in the Gospels, things look different to me now.
Well, Joe, I want to segue in with you here because that was it's funny you mentioned that, Dr. Price, because I've heard you make statements about full preterism in the past. And one of the biggest things prior to even being introduced to Joe's work, I saw the documentary briefly on YouTube, and Joe, you sit there and you go, well, it's been, and you got fanciful music going in the background. So, I'm stimulated. And all of a sudden I hear you say, well, it is my research that has led me to conclude that the second coming, or the coming, the final coming, the end, happened back then. And when you said that, I was already into this movement called full preterism, and pretty much they're trying to be faithful to the text. They don't care what church history wants to tell you. They say it says soon, it says this generation, it says some of you standing here will not taste death, it says do not seal up the words of the prophecy of this book, for the time is at hand. It's and we're being faithful to the text. So I said, well, Jesus had to come within that generation's time at the end, which was the apocalyptic temple's destruction. And so I knew that if I was within Christendom, I was the closest to the truth you could possibly get, right? And all of a sudden I hear Joe say that, and I'm like, So I listened to Joe, and then Joe goes, but it wasn't Jesus. It was Vespasian and Titus. And I was like, hold on, this doesn't make sense. And then I come to hear Josephus. We used to run to Josephus all the time and say, Jesus fulfilled this, Joe. He fulfilled it, right? He came on the clouds. Josephus said he saw the armies on the clouds circling Jerusalem. But then he goes to tell you who this was. So I tell Christians all the time today, I say, and I want to segue into you, Joe, with this, is you say Jesus came, the full preterist, all right, and those, who are on that, they're one step away from being where I am in terms of that. You say it was Jesus who came. Josephus says it was Titus. And you see that the New Testament almost literally interconnects to Josephus. Early church fathers used it to prove the divinity of Jesus. That's literally how they did. Well, Jesus said he would, and here Josephus is, but they're not seeing that it was Titus. So I want to go into Joe here. Joe, you want to add to what Dr. Bob has mentioned here and segue into some of this, because I don't think it can be said enough. I don't think it can be overstated how important that connection to Titus and Josephus is with the gospel narratives.
Well, I just think that the sort of the things about Josephus that have been overlooked are his divine inspiration at the beginning of the of the war, where after the Flavians capture him, where he comes to the position that God's favor has left the Jews and has gone over to the Romans. Okay, so this basically is a description of a new covenant. Okay, I mean, it's not expressed exactly, but it's hard to really see it in any other way. That's really what Josephus is saying. And he says that he's had like a dream, a connection to God, and now he's bringing forth this new information. And then beyond that, his statement that the messianic prophecies were not about a Jew, but about Vespasian and his government. Okay, so meaning the Flavian dynasty. So I think that those two facts plug in like so many other facts. In other words, when Jesus talks about Jerusalem being encircled, I mean, Josephus records this. When he talks about Jesus predicts that the temple complex is going to be raised, I mean, Josephus records this. So when you look at the relationship between Jesus's prophecies and the history that Josephus records, you have a very obvious connection. It's one is predicting, the other is recording. But now you have these other statements that Josephus makes. So, well, what is the right context, to like basically understand them in? Well, Robert was talking about the discourse where Jesus talks about all of the events are going to come within 40 years, and he's clearly describing the events that'll occur in Jerusalem during the Roman Jewish War in 40 years from the point when he's talking about it. And he talks about an individual who's going to come with these events. He talks about the Son of Man. So I took the position that logically the Son of Man would be Vespasian and Titus. In other words, they would have the Flavian Caesar would have the title, this messianic title, because Josephus predicted all these other things, and he states flatly that the messianic prophecies will foresee Vespasian's government. So what I basically with Caesar's Messiah, all it really is just an attempt to read the Gospels logically. They're not often attempted to be read logically. In fact, you could ask the question, why would you? The authors would not, care about such a thing. But if you look at the very beginning of the Gospels, the first few pages of Matthew, you can see that the relationship, the typologic relationship between Moses and Jesus is sequential. Okay, so there is a kind of logic that the authors are engaging in. And so when you then look at the events of the military campaign, you can see kind of a broad overall structure. I mean, in Caesar's Messiah, I show lots of little tiny details, and in some cases, I actually do quite a bit of like a literary kind of, sort of puzzle solving, which many people don't agree with, but many of the parallels are very straightforward, like the encircling of the city with a wall. And when you look at them as an overall construction, you can see that there is a sequence of these things that are occurring. And this really is, I think, the critical thing that New Testament scholarship was overlooking. And that's why I wrote a piece for Robert that I guess is out now in the Journal of Higher Criticism, where I talk about sequence, that this is something that people should look at, that the actual events in Jesus's ministry may have the sequence that they occur and may have a meaning. And in my opinion, if you then look at that and see the relationship to the Flavian military campaign, you end up with an explanation for the identity of the Son of Man. And so I simply draw the conclusion that the Son of Man is basically the Flavian Caesar.
So Dr. Price, if you don't, we're going to go back and forth. I'm recently going back through Caesar's Messiah because God forbid, I really need to re-immerse myself with some of the arguments that Joe made. When I first heard the book, or actually read the book, I was fascinated. I mean, it was overwhelming, and there were so many details, it was just too much. I was like, only certain parts stuck out. I was like, whoa, this theory is hardcore, but I didn't realize so many details. When's the last time? It's been years since you've read it, I suspect.
Yeah.
but you recall some of the details and stuff that he had discussed. So I wanted to talk about some of those, if that's okay, to delve into some of the areas with that, and maybe get your opinion, because I really like and appreciate the sequence argument that Joe's making here. I think there's some validity to it. And one of the interesting things, Joe, where you talked about in the biography, the autobiography of Josephus, where he sees his 3 friends crucified.
Oh,
And
yeah.
he freaks out. I mean, he goes to Titus begging and crying, pleading on his behalf, on his friends' behalf. They take him down. 2 of them die. 1 of them is revived by a physician. If this is not a direct, purposeful literary device to apply into the New Testament Gospels, I really don't know a better example. And you did a great job of pointing out that example. Do you recall that example being mentioned in the show, Price?
Oh, yeah. In fact, that would explain a puzzle in the usual understanding of the Gospels as history. Joseph of Arimathea asks for the body of Jesus and gets it. What about the other 2? Did he not give a damn about them, or what? I realize that's not a huge gaping mystery, but it is a little odd that they make a big deal out of telling you there were 2 crucified with Jesus, and then only Jesus gets rescued. So the Josephus version sort of accounts for those guys. They too wound up not really being delivered because they were too far gone. But the one was that just clicks with me. You can't prove it, but that's the way it always is. I forget who said this, but if new light is suddenly shed on the text by a hypothesis, that's a pretty good reason to favor it. By the way, when Joe mentioned how Josephus was saying that the covenant with God had been removed from the Jews and passed on to the Romans, I couldn't help thinking of Matthew 21. Let's see. 43. This is at the end of the parable of the vineyard, where they all the messengers from the owner, they get beat up and killed and all that stuff. The punchline is Jesus says, "Therefore I tell you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a nation producing the fruits of it." Well, of course, that could just mean the Gentile mission, but Matthew certainly didn't think that no Jews were to be let in on Christianity, that that any participation in the kingdom of God by Jews was now over. Obviously not, because of the Jewish nature of the Gospel of Matthew. But a nation, it sounds like what Josephus said.
You remind me of a place in Matthew, I believe it is, where the the Sanhedrin are arguing. Jesus just told a guy to stretch forth his arm, I think, and his arm comes out of nowhere. And they all murmur amongst themselves and say, we need to kill this guy, because if we let him go on, everyone will believe in him. And then it literally says, and me and Dr. Luther, and I apologize, Dr. Price, I called you Price. I actually got criticized in one of my comments on my last video for saying, and I love you. You're like a pops to me. I mean, I literally, I don't ever mean disrespect, but I called you Price and I meant Dr. Price, but I get
what the heck? I can't stand the pomposity where people. A friend of mine was at a community college where he taught, and they were in some sort of faculty meeting, and somebody complained that the students, I guess, were not calling him or her Dr. So-and-so. And my friend piped up and said, I bet you never hear this at Harvard. It just shows this insecurity. So I hate that.
Yeah,
you call me anything but late for pizza.
Well, that is on public. That way everybody knows I've never meant disrespect, as you guys know that. But Dr. Luther and I, we had a little tit for tat discussion. We do this. We bounce idea. We argue. We just do it on purpose to test things. And in the text, it says, we need to kill him. It's better that one man dies for the nation, right? And it's a prophecy. They claim it as a prophecy that one man dies for the nation, or else the Romans will take away our nation and take away our place. Now,
which probably means the temple.
Right. So why they take away their nation and take away their place? Technically, it sounded to me as though the Romans are going to replace them, is what it sounded to me. And Luther's like, I'm not so sure it goes that far, but I'm like, it just sounds too weird. They're going to take away their place and take away their nation, but the Romans would come in and lay siege. Kind of like if you go back in history with the Maccabees, the Greeks and the Maccabees were constantly in battle over this nation and this place. And when you see that the Romans come in to help the Greeks in history to defeat off the Greeks, next thing you know, Roman expansionism takes over and the Romans start to do the same thing. It's like, now the Romans are going to once again take away what the Jews have been fighting all along. So any thoughts on that, Joe or Price?
Well, it's in the Gospel of John, by the way.
Okay,
But
John.
that's neither here nor there. Yeah.
Yes, sir. What do you think about that, Joe?
Well, I mean, I think I just read that too as just slightly veiled description of what occurred, and therefore it is written after the fact, and it is written by an author that understood that the Romans were basically going to try to insert a new kind of covenant, a new kind of basically Judaism that would be Roman dominated. It's just, to me, if you're managing a prison of nations, as the Roman imperial bureaucracy was doing, you need to have every trick in the book in order to control the empire. And so, you know, if you've looked at the Dead Sea Scrolls, you can see there's a lot of fire and brimstone in that stuff, and that isn't going to help anything, you know. So this other literature comes forward, and I just think that you know, if you just follow the money, you can see who's writing it, and then when you get to the point where the literature makes perfect sense. I mean, I argue that you know, Caesar's Pie is a really very simple book because basically it just tries to have explanatory power in regards to the literature. Now, there's all these mysteries in the literature, you know, like what, like for example, like Joseph of Arimathea. Where is Arimathea? You know.
Yeah.
But if you just go, well, Joseph bar Matthias, and it's just typologic, which is not verbatimism, it's just changing a letter or two. That just has a lot of explanatory power. And then when you say, yeah, well, like Robert was saying, well, why did the author even mention the two, you know, stick figures? Well, it's because you know, now you have the explanation that it's because they wanted to create a kind of typologic monument in this point in the sequence. Now, that particular passage, oddly enough, as far as I know, hadn't really ever hit the scholarship publications, you know, as potential parallel before Caesar's Messiah. I think it was the first book that actually brought that up, though it turned out after the fact that a guy named Cliff Carrington in Australia had also been making the case. I just wasn't aware of his work. But in any case, so I came up with this idea, and I was criticized for it. And people thought it didn't, you know, it was a new idea. And some people said, well, this is far-fetched. But many people got it. They thought, oh yeah, this makes perfect sense. And I was asked, how did you find it? How did you, who you know, your fluency in Greek is not strong, you know, how did you come up with this idea? And I said, well, I knew where to look. I just followed the chain of events, and in the passage that describes the Josephus's taking down the guy from the cross who survives, you have these statements about where the event occurs relative to the process of the narration. And once I knew that there had to be something about the crucifixion of Jesus in Josephus, if in fact this was going to be the overall theory that I was presenting was correct, I figured, well, they weren't going to leave out that story. So I knew it had to be, from, if you're following the sequence, it had to be after Jesus predicts the fall of the temple, but before you have the big finale with John and Simon, which I had already deduced was something that was at the conclusion of the Josephus' narration of the war. So it wasn't in the actual book, Wars of the Jews. It was in Josephus's life, but there, he puts these little links in, oddly enough, to show that this event occurs exactly in the right place. And so that's actually how I found it, is that, and also in terms of explanatory power, I would say that, this parallel is very, very hard to imagine to be circumstantial once you start getting the sequence as a system that you have to maintain, because you have such a little tiny area of text that it has to occur in. I mean, in other words, Josephus would have had to have accidentally inserted this at exactly the right spot, but this seems far-fetched, right? Because you have not only the action of this taking a guy down from the cross who survives in a group of three, but you have the name of the character, Joseph of Arimathea, being so similar to Joseph Bar Matthias. And then, the character in the Gospels is not exactly a verbatim, parallel to Josephus, but he's kind of similar. He's a counselor, or he's in the council. So you can see that if you're going to write a typologic bit and put it into Josephus, that it does seem to basically, have enough linkages to the story in the Gospels to make sense. So, that is what I look personally. I like theories that have explanatory power and are easy to follow. And there's nothing easier to follow than sequence. and once you have it, then you get these little weird things that just pop up. One of the thing that I often get criticized for, and is, for example, parallels that are really abstract. The Josephus parallel is very, very concrete. In fact, if you take 10 stories at random from Josephus and then place them next to the gospel story about the crucifixion, 100% of people will pick out that story as being the most parallel. There's no one who will miss it. But there are a lot of the other stories that are very abstract. And so if you put those in, for example, like the Good Samaritan, which I interpret as a typologic link to the Titus restoring the legion that had been, the bandits had attacked, and I think, well, this is what is going on in Samaria. Titus restores the legion, and the story of the Good Samaritan and Jesus, but that's an example of, well, you would only make that argument if you are supported by the sequence. Mm-hmm. Because if you make that argument as a standalone case, you're basically mentally ill. I mean, it is that abstract, Is
it fair? And I don't mean to interrupt, but I think this is important. It's fair, Dr. Price, that maybe you never saw the power of his sequential argument to maybe even say, and even today you might say, well, I don't follow all those arguments, but you get more where he's coming from than you originally may have. And at first I remember the word parallel mania came up, and I love you guys because it's like, wow, look at you now. You guys are willing to discuss these things and open-minded to these discussions. Do you would you say that it's grown on you over time? And
yeah, a similar sort of a case is made by Dennis MacDonald in his book on the Gospel of Mark and the Homeric epics, where he traces features of the story of Odysseus and shows that some of them are howlingly obvious, like the demons going into the pigs. That's pretty obviously Circe changing Odysseus's soldiers into pigs. The story of the Gerasene demoniac is certainly based on that of Polyphemus the Cyclops. In fact, I wrote a little story once called The Son of Jehovah versus the Cyclops, with a sort of a tip of the hat to these old sword and sandal movies, the Sons of Hercules. And well, that's so obvious. And there's some other ones like that. well, once you see that, McDonald shows that there are plenty of other parallels that you would never notice as such. They're not real strong, but the fact that you can point them out in pretty much the same sequence, part of the same story, you got to take a second look. And Thomas Brody does this with the Gospel of Luke and the Deuteronomic history in the Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. And so I've come to see that this is a legitimate and compelling way of viewing these things. You wouldn't, by themselves, they're not enough to make the case, but once you see the sequence, yeah.
You know, I wanted to say that, in my opinion, you have a little primer for the typology that links, you know, the Josephus and the Gospels. And it's in the very beginning of Matthew. You know, it's the famous Jesus-Moses typology, you know, where you have Joseph goes to Egypt, you know, you have the statement that, you know, then you have the massacre of the innocents, you have the statement, they are dead who sought the young child's life. And then you go into the wilderness. Now in Matthew it goes 40 days, but in the you know, in the Old Testament it's 40 years. So you have parallelism, but not verbatimism, right? But then you have the three temptations where he does actually use quotes out of the Old Testament. So you know that there is this linkage back to Moses. But the interesting thing is that it's all in sequence. So Matthew has given a sequence, and what that enables you to do is to see the parallel to the baptism event. Because if it wasn't for the sequence, Jesus' baptism with John wouldn't be comprehensible as typology. It's only when you realize it's in the same place that the passing through the Red Sea occurs in the Old Testament that suddenly you can see, wait a second. There is parallelism here, and then when you start looking, you can see that the author actually uses the statement, "Out of Egypt I called my son," which is repeating the statement that occurs in the Old Testament, but he's placed it obviously in the story of Jesus. So he's representing Jesus as the nation of Israel, and now when you have the passing through water, then that makes perfect sense. But you see, this is my point: is that it's kind of an oversight in New Testament scholarship, in that the sequence, I think, hasn't really been studied. And, you know, I suspect that will change, shortly. And then I think there'll be the power of sequence will help scholars, you know, and Christians, hopefully everybody, make some more sense out of what the literature is. You know, the idea of parallelomania is not an incoherent charge. I mean, it is legitimate, and I've seen hundreds of examples of this, and I'm always thrown into that lump, you know, like, oh my God, it's like you're just seeing these parallels. If it wasn't for sequence, right, you wouldn't really be able to make the case for a lot of the relationships between the Gospels and Josephus. It's only because you can actually follow this sequence that you have a coherent position. And so we'll see. You know, that would be something that I think would be really useful to have more exploration by scholars of sequence. And I know that every parallel that is brought forward, particularly the ones that I didn't see or are not in Seed of Messiah, will be vigorously fought, and the charges of parallelomania will be a very valid kind of criticism, because you have to, when you look at this, it's an abstract and arcane kind of analysis. It doesn't have on the surface a kind of explanatory power, because you're using so much interpretation from the critic's position. He's looking into the literature and he's teasing out meaning, you know. But sequence is powerful, and you know, it's I actually have said that you could do mathematical proofs of like the Caesar's Messiah theory. But they're a little complicated. But you basically can say it's like the Josephus crucifixion story. I mean, it just shouldn't occur in that spot if it's accidental. It just shouldn't. I mean, if it was accidental, And it's hard for me to imagine such a story to be accidental on any grounds. But the idea that this could fit into even like a tiny sequence of events of just say, well, you've got the Galilean towns being crushed, you've got the journey to Jerusalem, you've got the encircling of Jerusalem with the wall, you've got the raising of the temple. That's like 4 or 5 things. And then you've got this event. No, it couldn't be accidental. You see what I mean? It just, the abstract parallelism becomes, in terms of the idea of it being deliberate, becomes really hard to dispute when you even have a short sequence. And that's kind of why I think really want to have just not just Caesar's Messiah, but just more criticism in general on the, well, what is in back of this strange sequence of events in the synoptics about the character of Jesus Christ?
Let me ask, I must, if you address this, I must have read it and forgotten it, but is there a Josephus analog for the dead coming out of the tombs when Jesus is crucified?
Yeah, there actually is. I'm not sure I put it in the version of Caesar's Messiah that's out, but I can send you there. They actually have the dead being removed. The description of the dead being removed from the caves occurs in Josephus in his history of the war at that time. They brought out an enormous amount of bodies, and so I mean it's just this little abstract event. But if you sit there with the text side by side and then just go through it carefully, you come up with they really, believe it or not, it's far denser than I brought out in Caesar's Messiah. It's just that at a certain level, it's extremely abstract, but they are always being inspired by the story. They're trying to make the case, the authors of the Gospels, that all of Jesus was a foreseeing of what occurred in the war. So everything is being inspired, by the events. It's just that there would be some that, you get into levels of abstraction where, it would just be foolhardy to try to bring this kind of analysis to the public. They would just immediately think you were a crackpot. So I just think like the stuff in Caesar's Messiah that I bring forward are just the simplest stuff to understand, really. I only put in 1 or 2 of the abstract parallels. Everything else is just really, it would always be picked out as the most parallel passage if you did random sampling. You took 10 random stuff from Josephus, put it in there, and then put the event in the Gospels and ask a bunch of people which one is the most likely. You'd almost always find the one that I point out as the typologic link.
Well, gentlemen.
Well, something else that raises in terms of the sequence business. What is MacDonald in the Homeric Mark book said that when Jesus is going to walk on water, I guess it is, he leaves with, or is it the stilling of the storm? I think it is. He leaves the shore with other boats, but we don't hear anything about them in the ensuing story. And MacDonald said, why is that noted? Well, it makes sense if it's just a vestige of the Odyssey, where there are other boats with Odysseus and his men. And so Mark began to include that too, but then lost interest in it, but it remained. Well, in the same way, what the heck is this thing with the dead coming out of their graves doing in Matthew at all?
Exactly. What is it for, right?
Well,
placeholder.
If you don't mind me commenting on this, I think this is just me from the outside. I've had Caesar Messiah recently immersed in my head, and I know the connection to the Odyssey here in the Gospel accounts. To me, if all the Gospel accounts were doing was trying to connect the mythology to the Odyssey, I think there's more to it than that. I don't think it's either or either, because
no.
I think it could be a mythologized version of a history that is going on in Josephus about the real accounts of what's happening then, using the Odyssey and other Jewish apocalyptic midrash concepts, going into the Old Testament and borrowing ideas. And what I find fascinating about the dead coming out of the graves and how that's connected to real dead bodies coming out of the graves in the Gospels, and in Josephus, there's another thing, the Valley of Gehenna, okay, the Valley of Gehenna, which is the lake of fire. Okay, this idea of people always taking the lake of fire and hell into this place somewhere else. Well, we always used to do that with the devil too. The devil is some outside being, spirit being. Well, I've always considered, what is a natural explanation of these? Well, Jesus is calling these people children of Satan. He could be referring to some metaphysical being possibly, but there's also the idea that hell is going to be cast into the lake of fire, and the lake of fire being the Valley of Gehenna is where they burned their trash, and a lot of these bodies from this war were thrown into after the war and burned. The bodies of these Jewish people who died in the temple were burned up in this valley. This is where they burned their bodies. And it's interesting, the Gospels say, do not fear him who can burn just or kill the body, but the body and the soul. So there's this interesting idea to even hell being cast into the lake of fire, where they were children of hell. And I hate to go too deep into this, but I see the mockery. I'm seeing there's some type of mockery towards the Jewish people in the Gospels. And I'm beginning to get more and more of that Atwill type mindset here and going, well, damn, it doesn't seem pleasant. They're constantly being ridiculed and poked on and prodded. I'm having a hard time here thinking that there's some positive light message for them. It's for these who are receptive of the story.
Well, remember, I mean, yeah, absolutely. Remember, and also, the blood will be on their children, right? And this is, the mob, demands that this will be the case. They self-curse themselves. I mean, this doesn't seem very plausible historically. I wanted to, I hope this isn't too much a segue, but I wanted to bring this up because I think Bob might get a kick out of it, and you too. But I actually talk about, like, they have the capture of the Mount of Olives in Josephus. They actually they capture a guy. And the guy who rides up and captures them is named Pendantius. And he comes and he grabs them and he carries them away, carries them by hand, right? And he's on a horse, and it's obviously a fictional event, but he says he's carrying this individual away on a horse. Well, okay, so then Josephus then goes on and he talks about a few chapters later, he talks about this root, this magical root that has the power of removing demons. And it's the mandrake root, and he describes how you have to have a particular way of getting the root out of the ground if you don't want to be killed. And he is using language from Pendantius Discordatus, the Greek botanist. He actually quotes this method of dealing the mandrake root that this guy had in his book, right? Now, the reason this is important is that then the story, the root kind of you kind of have to trace it, but it ends up back inside the Flavian court at Rome. And you have Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian all together. It's the only time, I think, maybe one other time, when they're all together in a room. And they use the root to remove the rebellious spirit from Jews. They bring Jews in and they take the magic root and then put it in the nose of the individual and rip it out. And this removes, the guy collapses, and the next thing you know, he's peaceful.
Whoa.
Yeah. So you see, if you look at this typologically, you can see that they're actually describing what they hope the character Jesus Christ will do. The reason I'm bringing this up, this is you have to kind of work through it carefully to make sure you don't lose context. But the reason I'm bringing it up is you talked about the guy who's interested in writing about Jesus as like a psychedelic plant. This was Allegro's idea. And in my opinion, Josephus is writing a direct typologic representation of that concept. I mean, he is absolutely saying that because the root is called baras. It's like a synonym for son. And he said the root would have grown forever, but the Jews had cut it off. Right. So he makes all these little cryptic, things you're supposed to understand about, well, the Jews had cut off a root that would have gone on forever, but it has the power to make rebels, peaceful. Now, bear in mind that as I see it, when you see Satan in the, being described in the Gospels, which are really having described as the messianic, a religious fervor. This is how the Gospels, as they turn history around, this is how they look at it. So long story short, but I think that the guy who is thinking about writing a chapter on Jesus as a psychedelic plant should really look at that story. Because when you link it all together, it appears to me that Josephus is just flat out saying that, what really is the Christ are drugs. That this is what really works.
The opiate of the people.
The opiate of the people, and Rome has learned how to use it as well.
Does that have a connection to the root and branch in the Gospels?
Of course. I mean, remember that you have all of this vegetative imagery in the Gospels that is related to the root and branch imagery of the Messiah in the Old Testament. Now notice, even things like the crown of thorns or the Garden of Gethsemane, these are root and plant images, right? And so what they're doing is, like the wine press that he's going to, be, evidently pressed into. What they're doing is they're representing the Christ as a plant. And then when Titus captures this guy on the Mount of Olives, he doesn't order him killed, he orders him pruned. And he uses the specific biological kind of, word that Colossae, I believe it is, which indicates plant husbandry. So what the Romans are really saying is that you've got a root and branch, right? Well, we just pruned it. We just domesticated it. And we put on our little piece of literature, and you have your fantasy stories, and we have ours, and we've just attached this. And so now at the end, you've got the story in Joseph that's buried away. I mean, no one. It's funny because I talk to guys that are they teach Josephus, and I'll have Skype exchanges, and I'll ask about that. They aren't even aware of it because Josephus is so relentlessly boring that even people who study him just can't get through the thing, and so they just forgot about it. One guy actually contested. He says, "No, you're wrong. I virtually have memorized all of it." I said, "No, trust me, it's there." We actually sat there while he went through and found the passage so he could read. It was good heavens. And this is a friend of yours. Anyway, so I said, there it is. So I said, but look at it in context, because when you think about what they're saying, I mean, they're talking about specifically bringing Jewish rebels in, where you have this plant that they're able to use to get rid of the rebellious spirit. They can literally put it into the guy's nose, pull it out so that the spirit drops out, and then the individual collapses. Then when he comes up, he's healed. He is no longer a rebel. Wow. Well, this is, I think, a really good place for, or at least a good piece of information for the gentleman who's going to be writing that chapter in the book we're talking about, who's going to cover, the idea of Messiah as psychedelic. Because I just think that I think it's a really interesting kind of story, interesting symbolism. I think it fits really well into his idea.
Wow, yeah, Phil Robinson's
doing I'm going to contact him and pass that on, see if he finds it.
This reminds me also of the Gerasene demoniac again, in terms of the same sort of metaphor. It's not aimed the same way, but the pigs who are stampeded into the lake, and it's by a legion of demons. It's been pointed out many times, is not original with me, that the Roman legion who was camped or whatever in that area, their standard image was that of the boar.
Right.
And so that it looks like somebody was saying that Jews will drive the Roman occupiers into the sea. I don't know. I mean, who knows where each individual passage comes from? But it's the same sort of I bring it up only because it's the same kind of metaphor.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We have to start looking at the war as the basis for a lot of the metaphors, and this has unfortunately hasn't really been done. I mean, the war is sort like. But I do like I like MacDonald's stuff. I think that the thought world of the author certainly obviously included the Odyssey, for heaven's sakes. I mean, it's probably the most important intellectual, thing that they had in their head. So the idea that they wouldn't, because if they're not basically coming from the perspective of Orthodox Jews to some extent, or Messianic Jews, then what is their mind like? Who could write something like the Gospels if they're not sincere? Well, that would be sophisticated Roman bureaucrats who are very familiar with the Jewish religion, like, for example, the Alexanders or the Herods, those kinds of people. But those people would know the Odyssey inside and out. I mean, they couldn't write literature without having those ideas come forward. And so I've always thought that MacDonald was onto the right stuff. In my opinion, I like his stuff a lot. Yeah.
I appreciate this nugget dropping. You guys are this is what makes these shows so good. I want to move into another topic, if you don't mind, pertaining to these similar concepts of parallels. You talk about in your book Eleazar being really Jesus in the text. And I think you mentioned briefly the man who grabs Eleazar, if I'm not mistaken, by the ankle.
That's on the Mount of Olives. Yeah, but they don't name him as Eleazar.
Okay.
They name him as a man of a eminent family.
Okay.
It's just like if you look at the Cannibal Mary passage, right? The Cannibal Mary passage is very famous, and a lot of people have linked it to the Passover. There are people who make the case that the kid looks like a Passover lamb, a human Passover lamb. There's different reasons for this. The reason that I would think that the guy is a Passover lamb is just that they have this little piece of symbolism in there where they say he's from the house of hyssop. The kid is from the house of hyssop. And like if you look in the Gospels, they identified Jesus as a Passover lamb by touching him with hyssop. Here, the kid who, is going to be eaten is from the house of hyssop. So this is, it's a kind of thing where you could go, well, this is far-fetched, but when you have it placed in sequence, and then you have a whole cluster of, like in the Josephus thing, where you've got, you have three people, one survives, the last name, the Roman commander is the one who's begged. I mean, you got all these kind of parallel event, and it's occurring in the right place. To me, it's far-fetched to argue it's not deliberate. Mm-hmm. And the same thing with that, and then going backwards to the the guy in the Mount of Olives. It's just that he is, you would never make the case that you're really representing Jesus's capture on the Mount of Olives, unless you would look at the location of the thing and try to, do some sort of attempt basically to force the parallel, because it is they have the correct location, you have it captured. And so what he says is it's an eminent family. Well, that could be, the family of the Messiah, who would be, as the Jews would have the Messianic lineage, the Davidic lineage. So, it's it all makes sense when you lay it out in sequence and place these little details into that kind of a context. But man, you have to have a very solid sequence established to try to, make these sorts of, metaphorical connections. If you have an established sequence, then yeah, they make perfect sense. And that's why the Mount of Olives things is, it's a good place to look at it. And that is the beginning of the story, that goes out to this magical plant that the Flavians used to get rid of the demons. But man, the connection is so abstract, because you have to know that the nature of capturing the mandrake root safely is the method that the guy actually picks the character up. And it's just, I don't go into that much in Seeds of Messiah. I'm going to leave that for, the higher pay grade people later on who want to get into that stuff. I just think, look, you got a sequence that's solid and strong. You can now, from there, you can go forward and into these more complex stuff. And the authors want you to. The authors of the Gospel and Josephus are very proud of these little abstract connections, but you shouldn't try to use that as the basis to convince someone of the existence of the relationship.
Yeah, it's just once you've got it, it's provided a lens through which new things become visible.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, if you don't mind me bringing Lazarus to the table, I think that's another one. Lazarus is an interesting name. Okay, we talk about names in the anomatology and such that we have going on in the scripture. You've got, from Judas Iscariot, the garbled up word Iscariot, being a Sakari, and so Lazarus seems like an interesting name, and you have some connection in your estimation, Lazarus to Eleazar.
Well, Lazarus means Eleazar.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's just a way of saying that individual's name, and I go into what I think is a very grim, symbolic storyline where I make the case that, the author is cryptically saying that Lazarus didn't actually return to life, but rather was just basically removed from the tomb. And they say that he had been dead 4 days. And I point out that, actually, this is not correct, because they talk about 3 days is in the Old Testament is when you can restore someone to life. So why would they pick this detail of 4 days, and so I say, that's because he didn't come back to life. I mean, you notice Lazarus doesn't say anything. And they talk about how bad Lazarus smells. He stinks. And so then the next thing you have the, where you talk about their perfuming someone's feet. And I just say, the last time we mentioned scent, it was Lazarus' body. So I just say that I strongly suspect the authors are making a point which are a crude and kind of vicious, comment on the fact that Lazarus has been raised from the dead, but he hasn't been restored to life. They're just dragging him around, and this actually ends up being the Last Supper. Now, this is, you can make these kinds of connections when you have the storyline established, but I think it's a lot better to, particularly for someone coming into the theory of Seeds of Messiah, to just look at the Flavian signature chapter, which is just you go through one story, and in that chapter I just lay out, I don't jump around from gospel to gospel. I just say, look, here's Luke, and here's Josephus, and here's the parallels, and you can just make your own mind up, without even much comment from me as to whether or not the relationship is deliberate. I think it's just self-evident that it is, and it's because the parallelism is found in sequence. I mean, you have the weird little things like divide a family 3 for 2, and then Josephus talks about the division of the rebels being 3 for 2, and it's it's a parallel that's very obvious, but the idea that this would occur in a sequence in both works of literature at the same place is just, in my mind, it's just far-fetched. It's just not a strong analytic position. And so when you get a bunch of this stuff and you go, this is all kind of seemingly to be connected, then what happens is that who the Son of Man is that Jesus predicts. I mean, it's the same. You see, the Gospels are really very logical. they look back to Moses. I mean, Jesus is like a new Moses, the new Savior. So you have a lot of Moses typology at the beginning. And then all these weird events that you can link into Josephus and the same system, names, location, concepts occurring in the same order. It just shows you who the Son of Man is. I mean, basically, vanity. I mean, this is the hard thing to get. I mean, it's like really hard for a lot of people who are mythicists, that I've had discussions with, is that they don't see any reason for the Romans to have ever done something like write the Gospels. Why would they bother with something this complicated? Well, they haven't been to Rome, because you ever been to Rome and you wander around, all you see are representations of the vanities of Caesars. I mean, these things are everywhere. They have giant statues to themselves. I mean, this is the divine August. This is the divine Vespasian's Colosseum. They're just everywhere. And so this is all, the Arch of Titus, for heaven's sakes. They actually have in the Arch of Titus, they have, from the Son of God Titus to God the Father Vespasian. It's carved in stone, right there on the Arch of Titus, which has, incidentally, events that Jesus is predicting, carved and relieved. You've got them taking the menorah out of the temple and all the slaves and all the people captive. So, I mean, the thing is that vanity is, unfortunately, sometimes, particularly when you're in a position of complete power, a very powerful animating force. And here we have an example of it, and that's what I would, and this is the thing, the mythicists, some of them, like Earl, who I've had a lot of exchanges with, Earl just doesn't believe it. He goes, no, there's no way. But I just think he underestimates the power of vanity.
Well, plus there is something I didn't know about when I first read Caesar's Messiah. I was reading in some of the minimalist literature about the Old Testament that it was the policy of these Middle Eastern empires to redefine the religion and the national origin stories of the peoples they conquered so as to assimilate them more. And a prime example would have been the Persian Empire when they took over from Babylon. Why would they, being non-Jews, bankroll the reconstruction of the Jerusalem temple? Why would they have cared to send one of their own officials, whether ethnically Jewish or not, Ezra and or Nehemiah, back there with the law of God? What interest did they have in it? Well, to pacify and to assimilate a new subject people. And so what they you see something like this even after the Assyrian conquest of Israel, when they brought in colonists from elsewhere and acclimated them to a kind of Judaism. Well, when Persia did this, apparently it brought in basically a kind of Judaized Zoroastrianism, all sorts of things that were not in Israelite religion beforehand, including a cosmic virgin-born Messiah, who would raise the dead for the final judgment, an apocalyptic periodization of world history, the notion of an evil anti-God. These things were so alien to traditionalist Jews represented by the Sadducees that apparently they nicknamed those Jews who embraced them as Parsees or Pharisees, Persians. You're not Jews anymore. You guys are Parsees, which is still called in India. And this caught on, and not among everybody, but enough so that it redefined Judaism. Well, once I read the Creating Christ, I realized, well, that's just what Joe and others were saying happened here, basically. Of course, the Romans had an interest in coming up with a friendly type of the religion embraced by the people that they have now conquered, to provide the opiate of the people to say, hey, look, you can be good Romans, and we'll even help you reconsolidate your religion like we would like it to be. I mean, we know these earlier conquerors did that. It's no surprise that the same tradition and strategy would have been upheld by the Romans.
Sure, it'd be silly for them to do anything else. I mean, why wouldn't they?
Yeah, so I wasn't aware of this originally, what an eye-opening fact, and it sure makes a lot of sense of the Roman provenance view.
Well, what I love about the view that you guys have all brought to the table, being a bystander, is showing that the real key player in this is this Son of Man who's supposed to come. He's the secret voice behind the scenes the whole way through, who's gonna fulfill. He's gonna show you everything Jesus said was true. So technically, when Jesus starts to talk about the kingdom being taken away from these nationalists, the kingdom of God, the grafting in concepts of a new, these people who are going to start coming in, and the wheat and the tares, the judgment, salvation, resurrection, etc. All these things, and you do great, Dr. Bob, in showing stuff like take up your cross and follow me. Well, how did they know to take up a cross, and how did Jesus know he was going to be on a cross? Like, the narrator, the person writing this, is aware of something way in the future he shouldn't already know that's going to happen. So it's a fiction. We know it's a fiction. We need to look at this and see what kind of fiction we're dealing with. And the Son of Man pointing to Titus. I can't emphasize that enough, because we remain skeptics. We need to be in this kind of research. It's only fair. But nobody goes around saying the Son of Man is Titus. It's not said enough. And I don't think you can make a stronger case of any other position to fit that best than directly looking at Josephus and seeing who Josephus is saying the Son of Man is. And he's saying clearly it's Titus. So if that, to me, is so profound. You don't want to say it as a skeptic, because you're like, I'm hesitant to say that is what it is exactly. But that's what I keep seeing in this narrative. What do you think about that? Do you think that best fits that evidence in that case, that the Son of Man being predicted is Titus, in your opinion, Dr. Price?
It's a very powerful explanation for it. I can never really go beyond that with any of these things. I always think, well, until I get my time machine, these things have to remain just speculative, but it's a powerful one. There's some speculations that are not, but this makes an awful lot of sense, especially when Son of Man is sometimes a masking reference anyhow. As in the Gospel of John, where the crowd says, "Who is this Son of Man?" And a number of the sayings involving the Son of Man in the Gospels are self-references, but in the third person, so as to say, what is true of me is true of people generally. Like the Son of Man has foxes have holes, birds have nests, the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Well, that means human beings have no one environment, but it's also saying, therefore I don't either. Or the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. Well, he's as Matthew understood in the Markan passage, he's not just saying, hey, I'm pulling rank because I have a unique authority to forgive sins because I'm the Son of Man. No, he's showing you that the Son of Man, human beings, have authority to forgive sins. It's a rejoinder to what his critics and the audience think. They say, who but God can forgive sins? Well, I'll show you human beings can on earth as God does in heaven. And so he does mean himself, but he doesn't use his name or just say I, ego. He's saying this is true generally, and that's why I can appeal to it. Sometimes if you were talking about impending misfortune in your case. As to avert the misfortune, you would say the Son of Man, the Son of Man must suffer and be rejected by this generation. Well, of course, he only says that because he's the subject of it, but he says the Son of Man instead of I, as if to avert it, like speak of the devil and he'll appear, so don't speak of the devil. And so the fact that he speaks of, or how about, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? And he says, you say, and he says, the Son of Man will be seated at the right hand of power. Well, the Son of Man, it apparently does mean him, but why doesn't he say it? Whoever the Son of Man is from Daniel will be seated at the right hand of, why not say God? Well, because you don't want to take the name of the Lord in vain. So let's just say the power, as Hasidic Jews today speak of the name. Hashem, because even the word God, not so specific as Yahweh, they've come to the point of not wanting to say that. And so Son of Man can be a kind of a mask. I can't say it exactly, but this is who we're talking about. So this could be, and you notice Jesus says in Mark 13, let the reader understand. So we know part of it is supposed to be a kind of an apocalyptic mystery. You can figure this out like 666 in the book of Revelation. Let him who has wisdom count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. Well, you're supposed to figure out it's Domitian or Nero or whatever. It might be the same way in the Olivet Discourse, that they can't just blurt out that it's Titus, but they're leaving it open for you to fill the blank.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It is a blank, and it is possible to fill it in. The idea that as Bob was saying, is that is this strong enough evidence that we don't need a time machine? I don't think so, but I do think that it's a very coherent platform for basically for skepticism.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
I really want it because it's sort of like I would just say that people often ask me, well, did Jesus exist? And I say, look, that isn't the correct question, because the idea that you could ever disprove Jesus's existence is something that's impossible. The idea that there was an individual that was embellished, to become sort of a divine character in literature, how that doesn't necessarily mean that the character in the gospel is correct, but nevertheless, how can you disprove that there wasn't some basis for it? This isn't the right question. The right question is, what kind of literature are the gospels? And the gospels are typology. They're tip to stern. I mean, you can basically deconstruct every single story in the gospels, every passage, and say, okay, this is what it's based on. The real skepticism that I think will come from this kind of reading of the Gospels as typology is that people will know that the literature, the stories, were created by people who were not writing history. History would have been written in a different way. This was written as religious typology. It isn't meant to be understood as history.
On that note, Joe, I wanted to ask Dr. Price a question. Me and Luther were talking about this prior to the show. And I said, I'll ask this question if I remember. And now I remember. Okay, so I have some people who are on the historicist side. They're mostly minimalist. They see the validity of mythicism, but they're not sure. They think there really was a Jesus that was crucified under Roman procurator Pontius Pilate. And they use Tacitus, and they go, look, there was a guy, who was named Jesus. He was not that important probably, but they used him in this narrative, like they did the woe saying Jesus ben Ananias, and they used others. But he's not, you get what I'm saying, that there was this real guy named Jesus. And however, Tacitus is using that. How would you respond to that on the mythicist side? Because if that's our only resource, go ahead. If you need to take it, go ahead. I can pause this.
No.
Okay. But what would you say to that? I mean,
Well, I'd say there could have been a Clark Kent, a historical newspaper reporter, but why on earth would anyone make him into Superman? Because that's really on the same level. Why was Jesus important enough to be reeled into this story? Unless there was, I mean, even if you say he was a revolutionary, if that's all we knew about him, how did he get to be mythologized in this manner?
Right.
So it seems to me that there could have been a Jesus, but why are you not saying then that this is euhemerism, that as Herodotus did, there must have been a real Hercules. He must have been a strong man and a warrior. Now, when did he exist? Well, this story relates him to so-and-so king, but this one has him in the court of that king. If they live too far apart, I give up, I don't know, but there must have been a historical Hercules. Like, we now realize that was just a desperate attempt to hang on to some kind of belief in Hercules, who is still a hero today in another hemisphere.
Right.
But he was demoted from the sun god to a hero, a classic pattern. A god becomes reduced in scope to a demigod, half human, or just a human hero. Isn't it more likely that that's what's happened here? It's possible there's a deposit of facts down there, but it's just like Merlin the magician. Some people say, well, there was a Welsh poet named Myrddin. Could that have been the origin of Merlin the magician? Well, it could be, but so what? I mean, even if there was such a character, is that what we mean when we ask if Merlin the magician was a historical character?
Right.
No. Might have been inspired by the character in some way, but that's pure speculation.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Well, gentlemen, we're coming upon our 90-minute mark. Any last remarks? And we're going to continue this series. We have a lot of people who really enjoyed this dialogue between you two gentlemen, and it's always an honor to even be part of this. So you guys really lighten up my day, and a lot of people message me all the time, when are you dropping another one? So any
well,
remarks?
It's great fun.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to talk to you guys. I love it. I hope we can do it again. And looking forward to working with Robert on the, having a chapter in the new book on the general state of mythicism at this point.
Yes. Dr. Price?
Oh, well, just keep looking into this. Look at everybody owes it to themselves who's interested in any of these things to go back and read the arguments they once read and see, as time passes, do they look different? Because they're inevitably going to the more you read. So I certainly encourage that.
Thank you, Dr. Price. I appreciate that. Joe?
See you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Check out their book, guys. And like I said, you're only going to find it here at Mythvision. Your host, Derek Lambert. And we will hope to resurrect Lex Luthor from the dead here on the next one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Auf Wiedersehen.